I mean, El Cap probably is the most positive climbing experience I've ever had. And normally you'd rappel it with 2 ropes, but I wasn't going to carry 2 ropes because I was climbing by myself, and then pick up this hiking trail, which I thought I'd be able to find. I was like, oh no. And so then I began this kind of intense survival experience trying to quest up this mountainside. Are we allowed to curse?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was kind of up. Yeah. It's really scary.
How the visualization of I'm the man actually compared to how it felt. Would you take us to the most scared you've ever been on the face?
Oh, I mean, I don't even know. I've so many random stories of like, and then I thought I was going to die. Like the punchline is always, and then I mean, I don't know. Okay, like I'll give you the very condensed version of this one experience in Zion National Park, which is a couple hours away from here. In a fit of sort of young 20s angst, I on-site sold this route, which means climbing it without a rope your first time with no preparation, like no practice. So all I had seen is like a topo. So I'd seen a map, like here's the route. I drove into the park. It was winter. I was going through some things with an ex-girlfriend and whatever. It is classic, kind of harnessing a lot of emotional angst to do something that I'd wanted to do it for a long time, and it was within my abilities. But, anyway, the weather forecast showed that it was supposed to start snowing at noon, but I was kind of like, soling doesn't take that long. So I was like, oh, it should be fun. And then it's like a 800-foot route or 1,000-foot route. And normally you'd rappel it with 2 ropes, but I wasn't going to carry 2 ropes because I was climbing by myself. So I was like, oh, I'll hit the top and then I'll scramble up to the rim of the canyon, which is a couple thousand feet higher, and then pick up this hiking trail, which I thought I'd be able to find. Long story short, I sold the route. Pretty scary. It's kind of hard. It's called Schoen's Butters for anybody that climbs. And it started snowing on the last pitch. So as I was finishing, I was like, it's starting to snow. And I was like, okay, this is getting kind of full on. But thankfully finished the climb, made it to the top of the route. And then it turns out that the 2,000 feet from the top of the route to the rim was extremely steep, extremely technical, like mountainside that was all covered in consolidated hail, basically. It was like not quite snow, but it was like ball-bearing hail, kind of like desert snow. I was like, oh no. And so then I began this kind of intense survival experience trying to quest up this mountainside, which entailed all kinds of harrowing things. But basically, it was a building fear the whole time, because like as I'm soloing and I see the weather building, then you start to feel flurries of snow. You start to feel a little panic. You're like, okay, I hope nothing gets wet.
So how did you get up there? Because that sounds nigh on impossible.
Yeah, I was kind of... Are we allowed to curse?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was kind of fucked up. Yeah. It's really scary. And then actually it's funny because I want to call it the descent because it's getting off the top of the climb. But in this case, it's 2,000 more feet of ascent. But I was following this kind of giant geologic scale, like ledge system, like a ramp that was kind of trending this way. And it was capped by this big head wall, which basically like the head wall was too big at one point. And so I kept kind of trending because the head wall was getting smaller as I got higher, but the ramp I was on kept getting narrower and narrower. And then below me was like this 2,000-foot drop into the abyss, like into a classic Utah slot canyon, like the types of things you see in posters where you're like, that's a beautiful canyon. I was like, oh, this is really beautiful. But if I fall in here, like literally no one will ever find me because it's not, like you just be gone.
Yeah.
And I was somewhere that is not on trails. Like it literally is the middle of nowhere. There's no... And so this little ledge thing I was on kept getting smaller and smaller until it was kind of smaller than the size of half this desk, like this kind of width. And then there was a little tree coming up. And then I thought that I'd be able to sort of manage to get over this bulge. The bulge was getting smaller and smaller. And so I was kind of like, well, this is getting smaller. It's like, anyway, so I finally tried to tackle the bulge at a certain point, freaking broke a hold, fell off the bulge, landed on the tree, basically self-arrested on this tiny little thing, didn't go to the abyss, was like, whoa, that's really scary. And then, but then there's nothing. So then I just did it again because, I was like...
Only way.
Yeah, only way. And so then made it over the bulge, carried on to the top. But then even when I got to the top, like finally made it to the rim of the canyon and, there's like a foot of snow as it turns out, and it was snowing. And I was like, I'm not going to be able to find this trail. I was like, I am totally fucked. And it was an 8-mile like long trek to get back to because there aren't that many ways in and out of the main canyon of Zion. Right. So you kind of have to go a long ways on the rim to find the descent back in. It's like the Grand Canyon, basically. Anyway, just by sheer good fortune, found the trail, found the thing, post-hole out in the snow. It's all pretty epic. Came down feeling totally fried. And that's just one random story. I literally have a story just like that from the next week in Zion when I did a different route in the same emotional state. And yeah, so it's, when I talk about managing fear, you're kind of like, man, if you're doing stuff like that a couple times a week for a couple of years, you just have a lot of scary experiences.
But there's something like beyond the fear is your appetite for risk. that I'd like to explore, Alex, because I think the way you've described it as you're looking down the abyss is almost one end of the scale, but then there's the exhilaration of getting to the top of it or conquering El Cap and having and having that sense of achievement that you've gone beyond your comfort zone. Would you tell us what you've learned about risk that our audience could maybe take away and apply in their own world?
Well, I don't know. I think the key thing in managing risk is having like a frank evaluation. Like, is it actually risky, and how risky is it? Like, trying to be rational about. So much of free soloing is knowing when. You always have to stay within your own capabilities, so you have to be really honest about what your capabilities are.
Right.
And no matter how rad you want to be, are you actually that rad? It's kind of the main thing. And so there are tons of things that you'd like to do, but realistically you shouldn't, and you can't. And so, because that's kind of the interesting thing, is that within the context of rock climbing, my free soloing is very conservative compared to my climbing with a rope. You know what I mean? Like, when you're free soloing, you stay well within your abilities, you keep it comfortable, you're many grades below your actual physical max. Like, you're,
okay.
In general, free soloing is, you don't want to call it conservative because obviously it sounds totally insane and you're it's harrowing and all that. But really, compared to what you're able to do with a rope, you're trying to keep it pretty safe.
So how do you assess how rad you are then? Because in everyday life, people go, well, push yourself to the limit. And then when you fail, you've learned your lesson, you can go again. But you can't do that.
Well, no, so that's what you do in climbing as well, because most of the time you're climbing with a rope, most of the time you're climbing with partners. And so generally in climbing, you're failing all the time. And so you should have a pretty good sense of what your actual limits are. And then you back you back it up, and then that's your free soloing limit.
Payhawk has changed everything. I can control the company's spend in just a few clicks. All our day-to-day tasks are automated, and I have more time to take part in strategic decision-making. Too easy. But here's my secret. I miss the old days. Collecting receipts. Worrying when a sales rep leaves with the company card. Getting surprised by the cash flow. That's all in the past with Payhawk.
The visualization, though, really that's what differentiates free soloing from rope climbing is this belief that you can do it without a rope, but there's no real way to practice that if you're only going to do it the one time. So visualization is the only way to practice ahead of time. And so that's imagining what it'll feel like without a rope, imagining even the psychological side, like how you'll feel when you look down and see your foot over the abyss, because the thing is, you're looking down at your feet all the time. So you're frequently just looking at this 2,500 foot drop, or, like 800 meters. You're like, oh, that's a lot of air. So thinking about all that stuff ahead of time, so when you get there, you're not taken by surprise or anything.
When you talk about sequencing, just to make it really clear, do you know the movements you're making from the very bottom to the top?
No, I know all the hard parts. So with El Cap, it's maybe a third hard, a third medium, and a third easy. The easy stuff, I don't even think about. It doesn't matter. You just paddle up it. The medium stuff, I know there's what climbers call the crux to each pitch. So if a pitch is, say, 50 meters of, say, 5'10" climbing, of that 50 meters, maybe 5 of the meters will be the hard part. And so the other 45, I kind of know how to climb it, but I don't have to know all the moves because I'll just flow up it either way. And then the 5 meters of the crux, let's say, I'll know, like I'll remember exactly how to do it. And then the third of the climb that was really hard, that I know all of it, basically.
Right. And that reminds us of, we interviewed an explorer in the UK called Ash Dykes, who one of the techniques that he does when he does expeditions is he looks at, well, what could kill me? What are the moments on this expedition where I could actually die? And then he not only does the visualization that you describe, he then sort of ladles it in Technicolor with how am I going to feel? How am I going to get out of this?
Yeah,
when you describe those like that third bit where it gets hard, would you tell us how you go about addressing that?
No, I mean, I definitely think about all that as well. Like, where are the places where if my foot slipped, I would just die? And then also what would happen if my foot did slip? Because, most people, when they're visualizing like, oh, and then you slip and you fall and you just fall. But on El Cap, you don't just fall. I mean, you basically ragdoll down the wall because most of it is less than vertical. So you're basically bouncing down a less than vertical wall and occasionally hitting ledges and bouncing off things. And I mean, and there have been people who have fallen off El Cap in various ways, like when ropes get cut and accidents happen and things. And so that it's like a complete disaster. So visualizing that appropriately, it's like the crux boulder problem. If you've seen the film with the karate kick and all that stuff, that's 2,300 feet up the wall or something. But if you miss the move, you're only going to fall like 30-ish meters basically clean until you bounce off this ledge where you'll break both your legs and hopefully pass out. And then it's all disaster from there. I mean, you're going to, explode like a water balloon at the base after bouncing off a bunch of things. Like, it's horrible. And so, I think for me, visualizing all of that so that you really know, basically, because you just don't want to be up there and then for the first time be like, man, if I fell here, I'd hit that ledge down there. Like, you want to know that you're going to hit that ledge already. Like, you want to have already thought it through and still have decided to do it despite knowing exactly what would happen.
So you're really visualizing there the single worst thing that could happen to you.
Yeah, and also the best, though. I mean, you also visualize getting to the summit and being like, I'm the man. It's like, I mean, of course, you visualize the full spectrum of possibility.
But on the negative side, if you've visualized it in the detail that you have, does that mean those thoughts don't come into your head when you're up there?
I think at least for me, I'm less likely to have those thoughts when I'm up there. I'm less likely to have sort of intrusive thoughts where I'm like, oh, I never thought about that. Like, that's crazy. Because you're like, I've thought about all the things that could happen. I've thought about all the worst case scenarios. I've set that aside. Like, I've processed that already. And now I can focus on, I mean, and in the case of the boulder problem, it allowed me to basically think about nothing when I did it. I just climbed, which was kind of the ideal, the flow state, whatever. But like autopilot, I just did what I was supposed to do.
I love this idea of visualizing that you're a man as well.
Well, I mean, you don't set out on a multi-year project like that without imagining like how good it'll feel to finish it, to get to the top and be like, yes.
So here's the thing. You can visualize pretty much all of it because you've done it with a rope. You can't visualize the feeling when you pop over at the top and you've done it. So I wonder how the visualization of I'm the man actually compared to how it felt.
Oh, I don't know. I actually don't remember visualizing that much, but I'm sure I must have, thought about it a lot. I mean, I thought about it a lot because I knew that freestyling El Cap would be a very important thing in climbing history just because El Cap is so central to climbing history. And there have been a lot of other important things on El Cap. And I was like, oh, I just want to do something. I don't know.
What went through your head as you come over the top then?
Well, it was more like over the last 20 minutes or so, it gets kind of easier toward the last couple hundred feet are relatively easy. And so it was kind of like a victory lap, when you're just like, you're running your last little thing, being like, I'm so psyched. So in a way, when I crested the summit, it wasn't like all at once. I'm like, oh, elated. It was like basically the last half hour, I was like steadily getting more and more like, this is so great. I'm so psyched.
And was that the mastery that you were seeking?
I mean, yeah, basically. I mean, El Cap probably is the most positive climbing experience I've ever had. And that's largely because I put so much effort into it, so much time into it. And that's partially because there was the film crew involved. Because I think had it been just me, there's a decent chance I would have just forced it sooner. Because I think when you're by yourself, I'm at least a little bit more prone to just roll the dice a little bit when I'm totally by myself. To be like, this doesn't feel comfortable, but I'll just force it. Whereas when there are people watching you and filming you, you're a little more like, I should do this properly. This slightly, I don't want to be embarrassed. But so I think because of the whole process of the filmers and all that, I wound up putting more effort into it than I maybe would have otherwise. And as a result, it felt incredible.